power of attorney. An ordinary sheet of paper, standard letter size, with a blue notary stamp in the lower right corner. My signature, sweeping, with a distinctive loop on the letter M, except I never signed it. I found this document in my husband's briefcase on the 3rd of March, a Thursday, at 11:47 p.m. I remembered the time because I glanced at the microwave when my hands went numb and the paper slipped onto the kitchen tile floor. The power of attorney stated, I, Marina Sergeyevna Loginova, transfer the right to manage my share in Capri's LLC to Tamara Ivanovna Loginova, my mother-in-law, a woman who for 4 years had called me sweetheart, stroked my hair, and poured me mint tea. But let me start from the beginning. Vitaly and I met 6 years ago at my friend Ira's birthday party. Ira was renting a 2-room apartment near Chisty Prudy at the time, and the party was cramped, noisy, with wine from cardboard boxes and music from a portable speaker. Vitaly came with one of her co-workers, tall, dark-haired, with a dimple on his left cheek that appeared when he smiled. And he smiled a lot. He was standing on the balcony, smoking and looking at the lights of Chistoprudny Boulevard, and I went out to ask for a lighter, even though I didn't smoke. I just wanted an excuse to talk. We chatted until 3 in the morning. He worked as a manager at a logistics company, complained about his boss, talked about how he dreamed of having his own business. I listened and thought, here he is, a normal guy. No showing off, no, I make more than everyone, no flashing his watch, just a guy who wanted to make something of himself. 2 months later, we moved in together. A year later, we got married. My mother, Lyudmila Nikolaevna Sergeyeva, died 3 years before our wedding. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end, it took 4 months. She was a cook from God. Not a restaurant chef in a white toque. No. An ordinary cook who spent 30 years feeding people in a factory cafeteria and on weekends made pies so good that neighbors on our floor found reasons to drop by for a minute on Saturday mornings. After her death, I found a shoebox containing 3 grid-lined notebooks filled with her large handwriting, recipes. Not from the internet, not from magazines, her own, perfected over decades. Kernick with 3 kinds of filling, open-faced pies with salmon, bird's milk cake from a 1978 recipe that melted on your tongue like a cloud. I cried over those notebooks for 3 evenings, then decided, I'm going to turn this into a business. Mom fed people her entire life. I'll carry on. That's how Caprice was born. A catering company that started in my kitchen, with 3 pots and an ad on a classified site. First order, a birthday party for 12 in the suburbs. I cooked for 2 straight days, delivered everything myself by taxi in 4 insulated bags, made 18,000 rubles and nearly cried with happiness. A year later, I had a rented kitchen, 2 assistants, and a steady stream of orders. 2 years in, a production space on Baturskaya Street, 5 cooks, my own delivery van, and contracts with 3 office buildings for daily lunches. After 4 years, Capri's was bringing me between 400 and 600,000 rubles net per month. I bought the 1-bedroom apartment where I'd lived with my mom, fully renovated it, then bought a 2-bedroom on Preobrazhenskaya Street, ours, mine, and Vitaly's. I bought the car with my own money, too. A white Tiguan, not brand new, a 2020 model, but well-maintained with reasonable mileage. By that point, Vitaly had quit the logistics company. It was his decision, and I didn't object. He said he wanted to help me with the business. We're a team, Marish, he said, hugging me from behind while I was tallying the month's revenue on my laptop. I made him commercial director. He handled client negotiations, went to meetings, signed contracts. He had a way with words, I'll give him that. He knew how to charm people, crack a joke at the right moment, pour a client some wine, and by the end of dinner, walk away with a contract. I was grateful. I thought I was lucky. a husband who supports me, who's beside me, who doesn't resent my success but helps build it. My mother-in-law, Tamara Ivanovna, lived in Podolsk in a 2-room Soviet-era apartment that her late husband, Vitaly's father, had received. He died when Vitaly was 14, a heart attack at work, a foreman at a furniture factory. Tamara Ivanovna had worked her entire life as a nurse at a local clinic, retired on a minimum pension, and lived modestly. She'd come visit us every 2 weeks, bringing a jar of jam or homemade cutlets in a container. I always received her warmly. I'd put fresh sheets on the couch in the living room, buy her favorite tea, Greenfield with bergamot, and patiently listen to stories about her neighbor, Klavdia, who had blood pressure issues, and about how everything was so expensive nowadays. "Sweetheart, thank you," she'd say, taking my hand, and I believed her. Every single time. The first warning bell rang a year before I found the power of attorney. The 3 of us were sitting in the kitchen. Me, Vitaly, and Tamara Ivanovna. She'd come for the weekend, and I was making dinner, roast duck with apples, my mom's recipe. Tamara Ivanovna was drinking tea and casually asked, "Marinochka, so Capri's. Is it registered just under your name or under both you and Vitalik?" I didn't think much of it at the time. I answered, "Under my name, Tamara Ivanovna. I started it before the wedding." She nodded, smiled, and said, "Well, that's right, sweetheart. You're a smart girl." Vitaly said nothing at the table. He picked at the salad with his fork, eyes down. I chalked it up to tiredness. He'd gone to a meeting with a new client that day and come back irritable. Now I understand. He wouldn't look up because he couldn't look me in the face. The second warning bell. 3 months later, I accidentally saw a notification on Vitaly's phone. Not a full conversation, just a pop-up notification on the locked screen. Mom had written, "Did you find out about the notary?" He was lying on the couch, phone on the armrest. I was standing with a cup of coffee and read it without even leaning down. Notary. The word scratched at me, but I immediately found an explanation. Maybe Tamara Ivanovna was making a will, maybe something with the apartment in Podolsk. Who knows? I didn't ask, didn't want to look paranoid, didn't want to be that wife who checks her husband's phone and launches interrogations. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, sat across from him and asked, "How was your day?" He answered, "Fine," without looking up from his screen. I smiled and stayed quiet. That silence would cost me dearly later. The third warning bell I didn't even recognize as a warning bell. 2 months before the surgery, Vitaly suggested adding Tamara Ivanovna as a co-owner of Capri's. Just a formality, Marish, for tax optimization. My accountant suggested it. We didn't have an in-house accountant. We had an outsourced one, Lena, a quiet girl with a braid who filed reports once a quarter. I called her. "Lena, did Vitaly talk to you about optimization, about adding an owner?" Lena paused and said, "No, Marina Sergeyevna. Vitaly Olegovich hasn't called me in about 2 months." I hung up. Something clenched inside. Small, cold, like a pebble. But once again, I found an explanation. Maybe he asked someone else. Maybe he misspoke. I didn't bring it up, didn't argue, just said, "Let's not do it right now, Vital. I don't have time to deal with paperwork." He shrugged. "Whatever you say." And he never brought it up again. Out loud. Never brought it up. The surgery happened in January. Nothing serious. A laparoscopy. Removing an ovarian cyst. Planned, not emergency. I checked into the hospital for 4 days. 2 before the procedure, 2 after. Before leaving for the clinic, I gave Vitaly access to the work email, the password to the online banking, and the keys to the production space. "Just in case," I said, "if something urgent comes up." He nodded, kissed me on the forehead, and said, "Don't worry, Marish, I'll handle it." And he did handle it. just not what I had in mind. In the hospital, I was doing well as you can after surgery. A 2-person room, my roommate, an elderly math teacher named Vera Grigorievna, recovering from gallbladder removal. We sipped broth from a thermos and watched a Turkish soap opera on her tablet. Vitaly came once, the second day after the surgery, brought oranges and a bouquet of chrysanthemums, sat for 20 minutes, nervously glancing at his watch. "Lots of work, Marish," he apologized. "2 banquets this week." I nodded. "Of course, go ahead. I'm an understanding wife. I'm not going to demand attention when we have a business to run." Vera Grigorievna, after Vitaly left, looked at me over her glasses and said, "Your husband sure was in a rush, like someone lit his tail on fire." I waved it off. Shouldn't have. I came home on Saturday, January 9th. Vitaly met me at the door, helped me take off my coat, sat me on the couch, brought me tea. The apartment was clean, suspiciously clean. Usually when I went away for even 2 days, dirty dishes would pile up in the kitchen and wet towels would end up on the bathroom floor. Now the place smelled of lavender air freshener. The dishes gleamed in the drying rack. Even the baseboards had been wiped down. "You cleaned?" I asked. And there was probably too much surprise in my voice because he tensed slightly. "What, I don't know how to clean?" he grumbled, heading to the kitchen. I chalked it up to hurt feelings, like his wife doesn't appreciate him. I took a sip of tea. The tea was bitter, oversteeped. I didn't say anything. Then the ordinary days stretched on. I was recovering, worked from home the first week, called the cooks, checked orders. Vitaly left every day for client sites and came home late, sometimes past midnight. I'd lie in bed alone, hear him come in, hear the refrigerator open, hear the door close, and fall asleep to his quiet footsteps in the hallway. I didn't notice anything, didn't want to notice anything. On February 2nd, I remember the date because it was my mother's birthday, I went to the office. A small room next to the production space, a desk, computer, safe, filing cabinet. I opened the laptop, logged into the online banking to check January's revenue, and the first thing I saw was the balance. It was $340,000 less than I expected. January is a good month for catering, corporate events, New Year's banquets, orders for Old New Year. I opened the statement. Transfers. 6 transfers to an account I didn't recognize. $50,000 to $70,000 each, labeled operating expenses. Procurement. Equipment. I checked the invoices. There had been no equipment purchases in January. I pulled up the receipts. All suppliers had been paid from a different account, as usual. Those $340,000 had gone somewhere they shouldn't have. My fingers went cold. I sat in front of the screen staring at 6 lines in the statement, and each line was like a click. Quiet, distinct, irreversible, like the sound of a lock closing. I entered the recipient account number into our database search. Nothing. It wasn't any of our vendors. I copied the number, opened a new tab, and typed into the search bar. How to find out who owns a bank account. Nothing useful, just advice to contact the bank. I closed the laptop. My hands were trembling. I pressed my palms flat on the desk, dug my fingers into the cool laminate, and forced myself to breathe. Inhale for 4 counts, exhale for 6. That's how my mother's friend Aunt Nina taught me when I had panic attacks after Mom's death. Inhale, exhale, inhale. Maybe it's a mistake, I said out loud. Maybe Vitaly opened a new account for some project and forgot to tell me. I almost convinced myself. Almost. But the pebble inside, that small, cold pebble, had gotten heavier. I didn't call Vitaly. I don't know why. Instinct, probably. An animal sense that says, don't show that you know. Don't spook him. I drove home, made dinner, cutlets using my mom's recipe with breadcrumbs and ice water, which makes them fluffy. set the table, and waited for my husband. He got home at 10, sat down, ate 3 cutlets, praised them. "Delicious, Marish. You're the best cook in the world." I smiled and asked how his day went. "Fine," he said. 2 orders confirmed for March. I nodded. Didn't ask about the money, didn't ask about the 6 transfers. Just cleared the dishes, washed the plates, and went to the bedroom. Lay down on my side of the bed, turned to face the wall, and lay there with my eyes open until I heard him snoring. At 3 in the morning, I got up. Vitaly was sleeping on his back, arms spread out like a fallen angel. His phone was on the nightstand, face down. I picked it up, went to the kitchen, closed the door, and turned on the light. I knew the code. He'd never hidden it, or maybe he just didn't think I'd ever check. 4 zeros. He always used 4 zeros. "I've got nothing to hide," he used to say, and I believed him. I opened the messenger and typed "Mom" in the search. The conversation unrolled before me like a scroll. Long, dense, with voice messages I didn't dare play. I started reading from the end. The last message from Tamara Ivanovna had been sent at 9:47 p.m., while we were having dinner. The notary confirmed, everything's clean. All that's left is filing with the tax office. Vitaly replied at 10:03 p.m. While I was doing the dishes, "Perfect. I'll submit this week." I scrolled up. The conversation from January, from those days when I was in the hospital. January 8th, the day before my discharge. Vitaly. "Power of attorney is ready. Signed today at Kravtsov's. Tamara Ivanovna. Good job, son. She won't suspect anything?" Vitaly. "No, she's still groggy from the anesthesia. She's not thinking about any of this." Tamara Ivanovna. "You're a hero, Vitalik. We'll finally take what's rightfully yours." The phone slipped from my fingers and fell on the tile. Not loudly, but in the silence of the kitchen, the sound seemed like a crash. I crouched down, picked it up, made sure the screen wasn't cracked. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get my finger on the button. My temples were pounding. A taste of iron appeared in my mouth. That metallic tang you get when you bite the inside of your cheek, except I hadn't bitten anything. Fear had a taste, bitter, metallic, with a hint of bile. I forced myself to keep reading, scrolled to December, to November, to October. The conversation stretched back for months. They'd discussed everything: how to optimize my business, how to re-register the assets, how to protect the family capital. Tamara Ivanovna wrote in long messages, with exclamation marks and typos. Notary came out as notary, power of attorney as power of attorney. But the meaning was crystal clear. They wanted to take capris. My capris, grown from my mother's grid-lined notebooks, from my sleepless nights, from 18,000 rubles for that first order in the suburbs. They wanted to transfer it to Tamara Ivanovna's name and present me with a done deal. A direct quote from Vitaly's message on November 15th. "When everything's ready, I'll just tell her. Where's she gonna go? No kids. The apartment's in my name. Let her go crawling to her daddy." The apartment in his name. I reread that 3 times. The apartment I bought with my money. The 2-bedroom on Preobrazhenskaya. How could it be in his name? I exited the messenger, opened the photos. Vitaly didn't clean out his gallery. There were thousands of pictures. I scrolled through the recent ones and found it. A scan. A gift deed. I, Marina Sergeyevna Loginova. Gift to my husband, Vitaly Olegovich Loginov. My share of the apartment at the address. My signature. That same sweeping signature with the loop on the M, the one I never put there. Dated January 10th, the second day after my surgery. While I lay in that hospital room with Vera Grigorievna, while we sipped broth and watched a Turkish soap opera, while I was happy about the oranges and chrysanthemums, My husband was forging my signature and transferring my home into his name. I sat on a stool in the middle of the kitchen, in the dark. I'd forgotten to turn on the light, was reading by the glow of the screen, and felt the floor falling away beneath me. Literally. The tile under my bare feet felt unsteady, unreal, as if I were standing not on a floor but on water about to plunge through. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles went white. One word spun in my head over and over like a broken record. Why? Why? I gave him everything. I hired him when his boss got to him. I paid for the apartment, for the car, for his mother. I transferred $30,000 to Tamara Ivanovna every month. Her pension so small, Marish. I never once threw it in his face. Never once said, "This is my money." Because I believed family meant sharing, that we were a team. We're a team, Marish. His words, his damned words. I sat in the kitchen until dawn. When the sky outside turned gray, I put his phone back on the nightstand, in exactly the same position, face down, lay on my side, and pretended to sleep. Vitaly woke up at 8, as usual, stretched, yawned, picked up his phone, looked at the screen, got up, went to the bathroom, turned on the shower. I lay there listening to the water, and that sound, ordinary, morning, domestic, now felt like a sound from another life, a life that had ended the night before on the kitchen floor. I didn't say a word, not that day, not that week. I needed to think. I needed to understand how deep it went and what I could do, because knowing you've been betrayed is one thing. Proving it and getting back what's yours is another. At work, I acted normal, smiled at the cooks, checked orders, tasted new dishes. Vitaly went to meetings, or said he did. I stopped keeping tabs. What's the point of monitoring someone who's already made up his mind? Instead, I started gathering evidence. On February 4th, I went to a bank, not the one where Capri's had its business account, a different one, a Spur Bank branch on a corner far from our neighborhood. Asked for a statement on my personal account for the last 6 months. The manager, a young woman with a short haircut and a name tag reading Alina, printed 3 pages and passed them across the counter. I sat down in a chair by the window and started going through them. 3 transfers I hadn't made, 50,000 rubles each, from my personal account to Tamara Ivanovna's account. Dates: November, December, January. Regular, like clockwork. Except I hadn't made those transfers. I looked up and stared out the window. Wet snow was falling, cars crawled along the highway, people hurried toward the metro. An ordinary February day, and the last support was being kicked out from under me. Vitaly had access to my online banking. I'd given him the password myself before the surgery, just in case. And he'd used it, carefully, little by little, so I wouldn't notice. 50,000, not the kind of amount you'd go checking statements for unless you were specifically looking. He'd calculated it perfectly. He knew me. Knew I trusted him. Knew I wouldn't go digging. Knew I'd be busy recovering from surgery. Knew everything, and used every single bit of that knowledge against me. I walked out of the bank and got in the car. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and I sat there for about 10 minutes without starting the engine. Snow settled on the windshield in soft flakes, and the world beyond the glass blurred like a watercolor. I remembered how a year ago Vitaly and I had driven to Suzdal for the weekend. He was behind the wheel, I sat beside him, we sang along to some silly song on the radio, and he laughed, and the dimple on his left cheek was so deep, and I thought, God, how lucky I am. But he was already... I'd checked the dates in the messages, already then discussing with his mother how to take my business. We sang, drove along the snowy highway, and he smiled at me, knowing that in 6 months I'd have nothing. I felt sick, physically. Bile rose, burning my throat, and I barely managed to open the car door and lean out. I threw up right on the parking lot asphalt outside Spurbank. A woman nearby stopped. "Are you all right? Should I call an ambulance?" I shook my head, wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, and said, "No, thank you. I'm fine now." The woman walked away. I closed the door, leaned back against the headrest, and shut my eyes. Fine. Of course I wasn't fine. It was only beginning. That evening, I called Ira, my friend at whose birthday party I'd once met Vitaly. Ira had become a lawyer by then, specializing in family law, handling divorces, dividing assets. I called her from the car parked outside our building. Didn't want Vitaly to hear. "Ira, I need your help," I said, and my voice cracked treacherously against my will. "Marish, what happened?" Ira picked up on it immediately. "Not over the phone. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Of course. Come to the office at 10. I'll text you the address." I hung up and sat in the car for another 5 minutes, looking at the lit windows of our apartment on the 4th floor. A shadow moved behind the curtains. Vitaly walking around the room, talking on the phone. To whom? His mother? The notary who confirmed? Someone else I didn't know about yet? The shadow stopped by the window. For a second, I thought he was looking down at my car. I instinctively pressed myself into the seat. Then the shadow moved away. I exhaled and went inside. Ira's office was in a business center near Belaruskaya Station. 3rd floor, glass partitions, a cactus on the windowsill, and a nameplate reading Nikitina IV Legal Consultancy. Ira met me at the door, tall, red-haired, in a sharp gray dress with glasses pushed up on her head. She hugged me, sat me in a chair, poured water from the cooler, and I told her everything. From the very beginning. The mother-in-law's question about the business owners, the text about the notary, the suggestion to add Tamara Ivanovna, the surgery, the messages, the power of attorney, the transfers. Ira listened in silence. She didn't gasp, didn't exclaim, didn't say, "How awful." She listened like a professional. And that was exactly what I needed. When I finished, she took the glasses off her head, put them on her nose, looked at me over the lenses and said, "Good. You did the right thing coming to me instead of making a scene." I wanted to, I admitted. I wanted to throw his phone in his face and ask, "Are you serious?" And that would have been a mistake. Ira leaned forward. "Because right now, he doesn't know that you know. That's your biggest weapon, Marina, the element of surprise." "So what do I do?" I swallowed hard. The glass of water nearly slipped from my fingers. My palms were damp. Ira pulled out a notepad and started writing. "First, the power of attorney is forged. You didn't sign it. That's a criminal case. Article 327, forgery of documents. If they've already filed something with the tax office based on this power of attorney, that's also fraud. Article 159. "Criminal?" I repeated. The word was heavy, leaden. "Exactly." Ira looked up at me. "Marina, do you understand that they're not just being greedy? They committed a crime. They forged your signature on a legal document. This isn't a family argument. This is a criminal offense." I nodded. A lump sat in my throat. "Second," Ira continued, "the transfers from your personal account. You didn't make them?" "No." "Did you give your husband access to your online banking?" "Yes, before the surgery." "Verbally or in writing?" "Verbally. I just told him the password." "That's important. He exploited your trust, but technically you gave him access. However, the transfers you didn't authorize, that's theft, especially if we can prove he acted without your knowledge." Ira tapped her pen against the notepad. "I need screenshots of the messages, a copy of the power of attorney, bank statements, everything." I didn't take screenshots of the messages. I went cold. I read them on his phone, but Go back and do it. At night, when he's asleep. Screenshots, then forward them to yourself. Then delete the forwarded messages from his messenger. That's important so he doesn't get suspicious. What if he changed his password? 4 zeros? Ira smirked. Guys like him don't change passwords. They're sure they've got everything under control. I left Ira's office with a clear plan. For the first time in days, I felt not horror, not nausea, not numbness, but something different, cold, sharp, focused, as if a switch had flipped inside me, replacing panic with calculation. I drove home along Tverskaya, and the city outside the window was the same, gray February with dirty snow and billboards. But I was looking at it through different eyes, the eyes of someone with a plan. That night, I got up at 3 again. Vitaly slept as usual, on his back, mouth slightly open, snoring, steady, deep. 4 zeros. Ira was right. The password hadn't changed. I opened the conversation with Mom and started taking screenshots, methodically from the end, in order. My finger slid across the screen, and every message was like a blow. October 15th. Find out from Kravtsov how much a power of attorney costs. October 23rd. Kravtsov charges $150, expensive but reliable. November 3rd. What if she notices? She won't, Mom. She trusts me. November 20th. Vitalik, maybe we shouldn't. She is your wife, after all. Mom, we've already discussed this. It's my business, too. I work there. December 2nd. Kravtsov says he needs a sample signature. Find something with her signature. December 10th. Found one, a lease agreement in her desk. Took a photo. And then a photo of my signature, up close with the distinctive loop on the M. I forwarded the screenshots to an email I'd created specifically for this, a new account with a password no one could guess. I forwarded, deleted the forwarded messages from his messenger, checked that no traces remained, 53 screenshots, the entire history of the conspiracy, laid bare. Then I opened the gallery and photographed the scan of the power of attorney and the scan of the gift deed. Forwarded them, deleted them. Put the phone back on the nightstand, lay down. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like the mattress was vibrating. Vitaly turned in his sleep, mumbled something incoherent. I froze. He snored and went quiet. I lay there until morning, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Mom. What would she say? She'd probably look at me with her warm brown eyes, stroke my hair, and say, "Marisha, don't be afraid. You're stronger than you think." Mom always said that. I didn't believe it. Now I would. Next step, my father. My dad, Gennady Pavlovich Sergeyev, 64 years old, lived in Tula. After Mom's death, he sold our 3-bedroom in Moscow. Couldn't stay there. Everything reminded him of her. And moved to Tula, where he had a house inherited from his mother. A small house with a yard, apple trees, an old Moskvich in the garage that Dad tinkered with on weekends, even though he'd long been driving a Skoda. Vitaly knew little about my father. He knew Dad was a retiree from Tula, knew he'd worked at some government agency. I'd never elaborated, and Vitaly never asked. He wasn't interested. My father was an insignificant figure to him, a quiet, elderly man in a knitted sweater who came for New Year's, gave the neighbors' kids hand-carved wooden toys, and sat silently at the table while Tamara Ivanovna poured tea and took charge. Once, at our wedding, Vitaly called my father a quiet nobody from the provinces behind his back. I overheard, felt hurt, but stayed silent. Shouldn't have. My father, Gennady Pavlovich Sergeyev, before retiring, had served 31 years in the investigative committee of the Russian Federation. His last 8 years, as deputy head of the Department for Investigation of Major Cases. He retired with the rank of Major General of Justice. He had an address book containing the numbers of people who determined fates, judges, prosecutors, heads of investigative departments across the country. Dad never flaunted any of it, never told stories from work, never flashed his credentials at a store or on the road. He just lived, quiet, calm, with a perpetual half-smile and hands that smelled of wood and machine oil. Vitaly didn't know. Tamara Ivanovna didn't know. Neither of them had bothered to ask. To them, Dad was the old man from Tula. I called my father on February 6th, a Saturday. Vitaly had left for a client. I no longer checked where. I locked myself in the bathroom, turned on the water, and dialed the number. Marisha, Dad's voice, as always, calm, slightly husky. Did something happen? Dad, I need your help. Please come. A pause. Dad never asked twice. If his daughter asks him to come, it's serious. I'll be there tomorrow morning, he said, and hung up. He arrived the next day at 9 a.m. I met him at the building entrance, lean, in a gray coat and cap, with a small travel bag. We didn't go to the apartment. We went to a coffee shop across the street, small, half-empty, smelling of cinnamon and humming with the coffee machine. We sat in the corner. I ordered a cappuccino, Dad, black tea, no sugar, and I told him everything. Same as I'd told Ira. From the beginning, in order, with dates and details. Only with Ira I'd held myself together, and with Dad, I broke. Halfway through, when I got to the scan of the power of attorney with my forged signature, the tears came flooding, hot, scalding like boiling water. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing out loud, and Dad silently handed me a handkerchief, not a paper napkin, but a real cloth handkerchief, white with an embroidered monogram, GS. Mom's gift to him. He'd carried it for 20 years. Dad listened, didn't interrupt, didn't exclaim. His face was motionless, but I could see the muscle in his jaw working, steady, rhythmic, like a metronome. I knew that expression. I'd seen it twice in my life, when Mom got her diagnosis and when neighborhood punks shoved me off the swings and I split my knee down to the bone. Both times Dad looked the same, absolutely calm on the outside and terrifying on the inside. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, took a sip of tea, set the cup on the saucer, precisely, without a sound. "Did you save the screenshots?" he asked. "Yes, on a separate email account. Send them to me." "Dad, I don't want you to—" "Marisha." He looked at me. His eyes, Mom's eyes, brown, warm. But now there was something else in them. Steel. "Send me the screenshots and give me 3 days." 3 days? For what? For work. I didn't ask further. When Dad says work, he means work. The kind he retired from, but which apparently never retired from him. For 3 days, I lived like a robot. Morning, shower, coffee, work. Evening, dinner, a smile. "How's it going, Vittel?" "Fine, Marish." Lay down, turned to face the wall, lay with my eyes open. Vitaly didn't notice anything, or pretended not to. He was busy. Those days he often talked on the phone, stepping out onto the balcony and pulling the door shut. I could see through the glass as he paced, gesticulated, smiled. Once I read his lips, "Everything's going according to plan." A shiver ran through me. I turned away and started chopping onions for soup. Tears from onions were a convenient cover. On the 3rd day, Dad called. "Done," he said. "Come tomorrow, alone." I drove to Tula early in the morning, telling Vitaly I was going to a supplier in the outskirts to buy ingredients. He didn't ask which one, didn't offer to come along. Just nodded, looking at his phone. Dad met me at the gate, led me to the kitchen. Spacious, with a wooden table that still remembered my childhood. On the table lay a folder, not the kind you carry to the office. A worn cardboard folder with string ties, the kind they used in Soviet government offices. Dad sat across from me, placed his hands on the table, large, with bulging veins, fingers stained with wood varnish, and said, "Listen carefully." And I listened. The notary, Anton Igorevich Kravtsov, whom Vitaly had gone to, turned out to be more than just a notary. He already had 2 warnings from the notary chamber for questionable transactions. Dad's contacts had pulled up the information in 2 days. Kravtsov had been certifying powers of attorney without the principal present. That is, without me. That's a blatant violation. That alone was enough to void the power of attorney and open a case. But that wasn't all. Dad found out that Vitaly had already filed paperwork with the tax office to change Capri's ownership structure. The application was registered on January 11th, the day after he signed the power of attorney on my behalf. According to this filing, Tamara Ivanovna was to become co-owner with a 51% share. 51. A controlling stake. They hadn't even tried to be modest. They wanted everything. And one more thing. Dad opened the folder and pulled out a sheet. Your apartment on Preobrazhenskaya, the gift deed that you signed on January 10th. That deed has already been registered with the property registry. Legally, half the apartment belongs to Vitaly. I couldn't breathe. I opened my mouth and couldn't inhale. The air turned thick, like cotton. Dad poured me water from a carafe, thick-walled, old, with bubbles in the glass, and waited while I took a sip. "Dad," my voice was alien, hoarse. "What do I do?" He gave me a long look, then said, "Nothing. Nothing. I will handle it." "How?" "Tomorrow I'll call Kirill," Dad said. "The name the way you say the name of someone you've known for 30 years. Simply, without last name, without title." Kirill is the head of the investigative division for the Moscow region. We started out together. I'll show him the materials, and he'll decide whether to open a case. "But, Marisha," Dad covered my hand with his, "I think he will. It's clean. Forged signature, unauthorized financial transactions, conspiracy. A clear-cut 159. And the apartment? We'll get it back. A gift deed signed by someone who isn't you. That's a void transaction. The court will nullify it in no time, especially with a handwriting analysis." I sat at my mother's table, in my mother's house next to Dad, and for the first time in those terrible days, I felt warm. Not from relief, from something else. From knowing I wasn't alone. That behind me stood a person you couldn't fool. That the quiet nobody from the provinces had spent 31 years catching criminals far bigger than Vitalik Loganov. Dad poured more tea and said, "Now listen to the plan." The plan was this. I go home and continue acting normal. Give nothing away. Dad contacts Kirill, hands over the materials. Kirill begins a preliminary investigation. Simultaneously, Ira, my lawyer, files a court petition to have the power of attorney and the gift deed declared invalid. And, the key moment, we wait for Vitaly and Tamara Ivanovna to make their final move, for them to come to me and present me with a done deal, as Vitaly had planned. Because at that moment we'd have everything, evidence, filings, and witnesses. "When they come," Dad said, "I'll be there." "Dad, are you sure?" I squeezed his hand. "I don't want you to—" "Marisha," he smiled, and for a second I saw Mom in that smile. "This is what I've lived for." I returned to Moscow by evening. Vitaly was on the couch watching soccer. "How was the trip?" he asked, not looking away from the screen. "Fine," I answered, and went to the kitchen to make borscht. My hands weren't shaking. For the first time in 2 weeks, not shaking. Days of waiting stretched out. Ira filed the petitions, quietly without fanfare. Dad's friend Kirill began his inquiry, also quietly. I worked, cooked, Smiled? Vitaly noticed nothing. He started calling his mother more often, 2 or 3 times a day. Once I caught a snippet of a conversation from the balcony. "Mom, 1 week, yeah, definitely, everything's been processed." 1 week. So they were planning to come to me in 1 week. My heart lurched, but I pushed the anxiety down. Not now, not yet. 3 days later, February 19th, a Wednesday, Ira called and said the court had accepted the petition. The hearing was set for March 12th. But, she added, there were interim protective measures. The court had placed a freeze on any registration actions involving the apartment and the shares in Capri's. This meant, even if Vitaly tried to finalize the transfer, he couldn't. The lock was in place. On February 20th, Dad sent a text. "Review complete. Materials forwarded for proceedings. Stand by." 4 words. It was enough. On February 24th, a Monday, Vitaly said over breakfast, "Marish, Mom's coming Saturday. She wants to talk to us." He said it casually, spreading butter on toast. The knife scraped against the bread, an unpleasant grating sound. I looked at him. He didn't look up. The dimple on his cheek didn't appear. He wasn't smiling. "Talk about what?" I asked calmly. "About the future," he answered, and bit into the toast. The future. Our future, according to Vitaly and Tamara Ivanovna. I lose the business, half the apartment, and grab my pots and crawl to Daddy and Tula. I took a sip of coffee. The coffee was bitter. I'd forgotten to add sugar. Or maybe I hadn't forgotten. Maybe I just wanted to taste that bitterness as a reminder. "Fine," I said. "Let her come." Vitaly looked up. For a split second, something flashed in his eyes. Surprise? Wariness? Had he expected resistance? Questions? I don't know. He quickly looked away and finished his coffee. That same day, I called Dad and Ira. Saturday. "They're coming Saturday." Dad answered, "I'll be there Friday evening." Ira, "I'll prepare everything. I'll bring the documents." The remaining days, I lived in a state of strange duality. On the surface, normal life, work, kitchen, dinner, sleep. Inside, stillness. Not empty stillness, the stillness before a storm, when the air thickens and smells of ozone. I was calm, unnaturally, inhumanly calm, as if everything that could hurt had already finished hurting, as if I had already passed through the worst of it, through that night in the kitchen when the world split open, and now I was simply waiting for the pieces to fall into place. On Thursday, 2 days before the talk, I came to the Capri's production space early in the morning, at 6, when no one else was there. Opened the safe, took out the documents, the charter, certificates, lease agreements, client contracts, spread them on the desk, and sat looking at the stack of papers that represented the history of my life for the last 5 years. Mom's grid-line notebooks were there, too, in a separate sleeve. I kept them in the office like a talisman. I opened one. Mom's handwriting, Kernick, dough with kefir, butter, 200 grams, flour, 3 cups. The main secret, don't skimp on butter and don't rush. Don't skimp and don't rush. Mom taught me that all my life, through food, through dough, through patience. I closed the notebook, put the documents back in the safe, and drove home. Friday evening, Dad arrived. Vitaly was surprised, slightly, with one raised eyebrow. "Gennady Pavlovich? Wasn't expecting you." "Missed my daughter." Dad shook his hand, firmly as always. Vitaly winced slightly. Dad had an officer's grip. "Hope I'm not in the way." "Of course not." Vitaly smiled. The dimple appeared, a professional smile honed on Capri's clients. "Make yourself at home. Marish, put fresh sheets out for your father in the living room." I made up the couch. Dad settled in, set his bag by the sofa, hung his coat on the hook. Gray knitted sweater, as always. Worn jeans. The slippers I'd bought him 2 years ago, with reindeer on them, silly, but he loved them. Nothing in his appearance betrayed the general who for 31 years had investigated cases that made newspaper headlines in bold print. He sat at the table, asked for tea, and said to Vitaly, "How's the business, Vitaly?" "Excellent, Gennady Pavlovich." Vitaly sat across from him, relaxed, content, growing. "We're thinking about expanding." "Good for you," Dad nodded. "Marina's a smart one. Her mother would be proud." Vitaly paused for a second, then said, "We both work hard." Dad looked at him, just looked, calmly, without a smile. I thought Vitaly shifted back slightly in his chair, but maybe I imagined it. Saturday, March 1st, a day I will never forget. Tamara Ivanovna arrived at 11 in the morning. I opened the door. She stood on the threshold in her best coat, burgundy with a fur collar I'd given her for New Year's, with a box of Korkanov chocolates and a smile I used to think was warm but now saw as a mask. Behind her stood a man in his mid-30s, short, heavy-set, wearing glasses and carrying a briefcase. I didn't know him. "Sweetheart," Tamara Ivanovna hugged me, enveloping me in a cloud of red Moscow perfume she'd worn for 40 years. "Meet Anton Igorovich, our, consultant. Anton Igorovich Kravtsov, the notary who forged my signature." I shook his hand, dry, limp, and smiled. He didn't meet my eyes. He took off his shoes, walked into the living room, sat in a chair, placed the briefcase on his knees. I noticed the briefcase was new, brown leather with shiny clasps. A gift from grateful clients, probably. Vitaly was already waiting in the living room. Dad sat on the couch with a cup of tea. Tamara Ivanovna, seeing him, faltered for a second. Her eyes darted to Vitaly. He gave an almost imperceptible shrug. "He's just here. Don't worry about it." "Gennady Pavlovich!" The mother-in-law lit up as if she'd been expecting him all along. "What a surprise! It's been so long." "Hello, Tamara Ivanovna." Dad stood, shook her hand. "Good to see you." Everyone sat. I brought tea, green in Mom's teapot with a lid shaped like an apple. Poured into cups. My hands were steady, perfectly steady, as if I weren't a person but a machine executing a program. Pour the tea, set the cup down, sit, wait. "Marinochka," Tamara Ivanovna began, pulling her cup closer. "Vitalik and I wanted to talk about something important." She took a sip and smiled. "About family, about the future." "I'm listening." I leaned back in my chair. "You see, sweetheart," Tamara Ivanovna launched into that special voice I'd memorized over 4 years, sweet, enveloping, with notes of wise mother. "Vitalik works so hard. He's put so much effort, so much energy into Capri's, and I think it would be fair to formalize his involvement." "Formalize?" I repeated, though I knew perfectly well what she meant. "Register him as a co-owner," Vitaly stepped in. His voice was level, confident, clearly rehearsed. "Marish, I'm not demanding, I'm suggesting. We're a family. Let's be honest with each other. The business is shared, so the ownership should be too." Honestly. The word drove in like a splinter. I clenched my hand under the table. Nails dug into my palm. "And Anton Igorovich," I looked at the notary, "is here for what?" "Anton Igorovich was kind enough to agree to handle all the paperwork." Tamara Ivanovna waved her hand, as if the whole thing were no big deal. "So we don't have to run around to offices. He'll prepare the documents, you sign, and everything will be official." "I see," I nodded. "So I sign, and Vitaly becomes co-owner of Capri's." "Well, not Vitaly." Tamara Ivanovna hesitated slightly. "Me, in my name. It's more reliable, you understand. Vitalik is a man. He could have... Well, things happen, but a mother, that's forever. It's for the family." There it was. They weren't even hiding it. Sitting at my table, drinking my tea, from my teapot in my apartment, telling me I should hand my business over to my mother-in-law. For the family. I looked at Vitaly. He was staring at the table, not at me. At the table, picking at a crack in the surface with his fingernail. And if I say no, I asked, quietly, very quietly. Tamara Ivanovna and Vitaly exchanged a glance, a quick look, no more than a second, but I caught it. In that glance was everything, coordination, a plan, a rehearsed response. Marish, Vitaly leaned forward, I don't want to say this, but we've already partially completed the paperwork. There's a power of attorney. The documents are at the tax office. We just wanted to do this the nice way, without conflict. The nice way, I repeated. You forged my signature while I was recovering from surgery, transferred half the apartment into your name, siphoned money from my accounts. And this is the nice way? Silence, such silence that I could hear the kitchen faucet dripping, steady, rhythmic, like a metronome's beat. Vitaly went pale. Tamara Ivanovna froze with her cup halfway to her lips. Notary Kravtsov swallowed nervously. His Adam's apple jerked. Vitaly started and choked. How did you... I know everything, Vitaly. I said his name in full, without vital, without Vitalik. In full, like a verdict. I know about the messages with your mother. I know about Notary Kravtsov. I know about the power of attorney you cooked up on January 8th. I know about the gift deed. I know about the 6 transfers from the Capri's business account to God knows whose account. I know about the 3 transfers from my personal account to Tamara Ivanovna's account. And I know what you wrote to your mother. Where's she gonna go? No kids, the apartment's in my name. Let her go crawling to her daddy. Vitaly recoiled in his chair as if struck. Tamara Ivanovna slowly set her cup down. The sound, porcelain against porcelain, was brittle, fragile, like the situation they'd boxed themselves into. Marinochka, the mother-in-law spoke first, and her voice was different now. Not sweet, not enveloping, but thin, taut, like a string about to snap. You've misunderstood. We wanted what was best, for everyone. For everyone? I turned to her. For everyone. That's when you forge a signature? When you steal money? When a wife is lying in a hospital bed and her husband runs to a notary with a fake power of attorney? It's not fake, Kravtsov suddenly blurted. I certified it in full accordance. Anton Igorovitch, I looked at him, and he fell silent. You certified a power of attorney without my presence, without my consent, with a forged signature. You already have 2 warnings from the notary chamber. Want a third, or shall we go straight to criminal charges? Kravtsov went white, literally. His face became the color of the wall behind him. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, and said nothing. His hand reached for the briefcase, as if he wanted to stand up and leave. Sit, Dad said. He said it quietly, without raising his voice, but Kravtsov froze as if a hand had been placed on his shoulder. Dad hadn't gotten up from the couch. He sat there in his knitted sweater, cup of tea in hand, wearing reindeer slippers. And with a single word, the notary pressed himself into the chair. Gennady Pavlovich. Tamara Ivanovna turned to Dad, and something new rang in her voice. Not fear. Not yet fear, but the premonition of fear. Please stay out of this. It's a family matter. Family, Dad nodded, set down his cup, slowly, deliberately, like everything he did. Tamara Ivanovna, do you know what I did before I retired? Something in government, I think, she waved dismissively. But that's not the investigative committee, Dad said. 31 years, deputy head of the Department for Investigation of Major Cases, Major General of Justice. A pause. Long. Heavy. I watched the information pass through Tamara Ivanovna, like water through sand, slowly, inevitably. Her face changed, surprise to confusion to realization to horror. 4 stages in 5 seconds. Vitaly beside her. The same path, only slower. He stared at Dad, and I could see his pupils dilating, literally, physically dilating, like a cat's in the dark. "You're—" Vitaly swallowed. "You're serious?" "Absolutely." Dad leaned toward the travel bag sitting by the couch and pulled out the folder. That same one, cardboard with string ties, worn, placed it on the table, untied the strings. "It's all here," he said. "Screenshots of your messages, bank statements, a handwriting expert's report, the signatures forged, by the way, crudely forged, a ruling from the notary chamber, and a resolution to open a criminal case under Articles 159 and 327 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, fraud and forgery of documents." He took out the documents and fanned them across the table, like cards. Each sheet was like a blow, a screenshot of the messages, a bank statement, the expert's report, a resolution stamped in blue ink. Tamara Ivanovna stared at the documents, and I watched the color drain from her. Not just the flush from her cheeks, no, all color. She turned gray, waxy, like a mannequin. Her hand rose to her throat. A classic gesture, one I'd seen in movies, but never in real life. This is a misunderstanding," she whispered. "Vitalik, say something." Vitaly was silent. He sat gripping the armrests of his chair, and he was silent. His silence was the loudest sound in the room, louder than the dripping faucet, louder than my heartbeat. It was the silence of a man who understood everything, and knew there was no way out. "Vitaly Olegovich," Dad addressed him formally as if in an interrogation, "you have the right to an attorney. I recommend you exercise it. Investigative proceedings will begin this week." "Wait," Vitaly finally spoke. His voice was hoarse, strangled, as if someone had him by the throat. "Wait, we can— Marish, we can fix everything. I'll return it all. We'll void the power of attorney, transfer the apartment back, the money. I'll return the money, I swear." He turned to me, and in his eyes was something I'd never seen in 6 years. Genuine, unmistakable fear. Not an act, not manipulation. The animal fear of a man who's just realized he's facing prison. "Marish, please, no criminal case. I'll fix everything." I looked at him, at this man I'd lived with for 6 years, whom I'd loved, whom I'd trusted, who sang with me in the car on the way to Suzdal while behind my back he discussed with his mommy how to rob me blind, and I felt nothing. Emptiness. A ringing, clean emptiness, like a room stripped of all its furniture. "Take your pots and get out," I said, quietly, without anger, without shouting. I repeated his own words back to him, the ones he'd written to his mother. "That's what you were planning to say to me, Vitaly?" He flinched as if slapped. "Well then," I continued, "the pots are mine, the business is mine, the apartment is mine, and you're free. Pack your things and go to Mommy in Podolsk." "Marinochka!" Tamara Ivanovna sprang to her feet. "You have no right. My son—" "Your son," I turned to her, "committed a criminal offense. With your help, at your instigation. You, Tamara Ivanovna, are an accomplice. I'd recommend a lawyer for you, too." My mother-in-law opened her mouth and said nothing. For the first time in 4 years, I saw her without words, without sweetheart, without "we're family," without tears, without ultimatums. She stood in the middle of my living room, in the burgundy coat with the fur collar I'd given her, and was silent. Then she slowly sank into the chair and pressed her hands to her chest. "I feel sick," she said. "My heart. Call an ambulance." "You can call one yourself." Dad took out his phone and placed it on the table in front of her. The number is 112. Kravtsov, the notary, quietly stood, grabbed his briefcase, and headed for the door. Dad called after him. "Anton Igorovich, I strongly advise you not to leave town. You will be summoned." Kravtsov stopped, nodded without turning around, put on his shoes, and left. The door closed softly behind him, without a slam, like a verdict pronounced in a whisper. Vitaly sat in his chair staring at the wall. His face was white, motionless, like a plaster mask. The dimple on his cheek was gone. It wouldn't appear again, at least not for me. "Should I pack?" he asked. His voice, dull, flat, like a sound with the volume turned down to 0. "Yes," I answered, "today." He stood and went to the bedroom. I heard drawers opening, clothes rustling, a suitcase clicking shut. Tamara Ivanovna sat in the chair, hand clamped over her mouth. She wasn't crying. The tears were either spent or unnecessary. She understood. The game was over. Dad walked over and hugged me. Quietly, tightly, the way he used to hug me as a child when I scraped my knee or got a bad grade. I buried my face in his sweater. It smelled of wood and tea, and stood there for a minute. Maybe 2. I didn't cry. The tears had run out somewhere between February 3rd and March 1st. All that was left was warmth. Dad's warmth. The kind you can't forge, can't sign with a fake signature, can't transfer into someone else's name. Vitaly came out 20 minutes later. A suitcase, a gym bag, a plastic bag with shoes. In the hallway, he stopped and turned to me. "Marish," he began. "Don't," I shook my head, "just go." He stood there another second, opened his mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out. Tamara Ivanovna stood up, grabbed the box of Korkanov chocolates she'd brought, and shuffled after him. At the threshold, she turned back. "You'll regret this," she hissed. A final attempt, a last bullet. "No, I won't," I answered, and closed the door. The lock clicked. I leaned against the door and slowly slid down to the floor. The hallway tile was cold even through my jeans. I sat on the floor, arms around my knees, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the apartment was deafening, not empty, full of everything that had just happened. Dad appeared in the hallway, looked at me, sat down on the floor beside me. We sat there, father and daughter, on the cold tile of the entryway, leaning against the front door. He was silent. I was silent. There were no words. None were needed. After half an hour, I got up, went to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. Dad sat at the table. I took out Mom's teapot, the one with the lid shaped like an apple, rinsed it, added the tea leaves. We drank in silence. Outside the window, it was getting dark. February dusk crept over the city like gray cotton. The streetlights came on, yellow, warm, cozy. On the windowsill sat a pot with an African violet I'd planted in November. It had bloomed. 3 small purple flowers, bright, stubborn, alive. I looked at them and thought, this is it. This is what after looks like. The following weeks were tight, like a compressed spring. Ira handled the court case. The power of attorney was declared invalid. The gift deed was annulled. The apartment came back to me. Vitaly didn't fight it. His lawyer, who I later learned was paid for by Tamara Ivanovna, who had taken out a loan against her apartment in Podolsk, advised him to cooperate with the investigation. Kravtsov, the notary, immediately cut a deal, gave testimony, confirmed that Vitaly had brought a photo of my signature, and asked him to process it quickly, no unnecessary questions. His notary license was revoked. The money, $340,000 from the Capri's business account and $150,000 from my personal account, Vitaly returned. Not all at once, in installments, over 2 months. He sold a car, that, as it turned out, he'd bought with money from those very operating transfers. A blue Volkswagen Polo, 2021 model. I hadn't even known he'd bought it. Registered to his mother. Another layer. Another lie that burst like an abscess. The criminal case moved slowly. Investigations take time. But Dad said, "Don't rush it. The important thing is that it exists. It's their anchor. With that anchor, they're not going anywhere." And he was right. Vitaly, who in March still tried calling me, I didn't answer, fell silent by April. Tamara Ivanovna went quiet too. Ira said they'd hired a new lawyer and were trying to negotiate a reconciliation. I refused, not out of revenge, out of principle. There are things you can't reconcile. Forging a signature is one of them. The divorce was finalized in April, quietly, without scenes, without dividing property. There was nothing to divide. Everything was already mine. Vitaly signed the papers at his lawyer's office. Ira told me he looked like he'd aged 10 years. Unshaven, with dark circles under his eyes, in a wrinkled shirt. I should have felt sorry for him. I didn't. Inside, where love for this man once lived, there was now scar tissue. Dense, smooth, numb, like a scar from a burn. Spring came late. In early May, when the chestnut trees bloomed on the boulevard near my building, I walked to work in the morning, on foot, 10 minutes from the front door to the production space, and breathed in that smell, fresh, sweet, green. Capri's was running. The cooks were cooking. Orders were coming in. I hired a new commercial director, Sveta, a 30-year-old woman with a short haircut and a habit of talking so fast that even the clients couldn't always keep up. She was good, honest, and, what mattered most to me now, transparent. Every transfer, every contract, every receipt, everything went through me. I no longer gave out passwords to anyone. In June, Vitaly called. I saw his name on the screen and stared at it for a second, like an artifact from a previous life. Then I answered, "Marina?" His voice was quiet, broken. "Can we talk?" "About what?" "About us, about what happened. I understand what I did." I said nothing. Outside the kitchen window, my kitchen, in my apartment, summer rain was falling. Drops tapped against the windowsill, and that sound was simple and right, like everything that remained in my life after the lies had been removed. "Marina, I haven't slept properly in 3 months," he continued. "I understand there's no forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm ashamed, truly." "Okay," I said. "You've said it. I've heard it. Goodbye, Vitaly." "Wait." I hung up, set the phone on the table, looked at the rain. Then I opened Mom's grid-lined notebook, the one that now lay in my kitchen, and found the recipe for cherry pie. Mom had written, "Don't skimp on the cherries. Sugar to taste. The dough should breathe." I got out the flour, butter, cherries from the freezer, turned on the oven, and started cooking. That evening, Dad called. "How are you, Marisha?" "Good, Dad. Baked a pie. Mom's recipe with cherries." "Did it turn out?" "It did." A pause. Then Dad said, "Your mother would be proud. So am I." "Thanks, Dad." "Well, hang in there. Call if you need anything." "I will." I hung up. The sun was setting, low, warm, orange. A ray fell on the kitchen table, on Mom's notebook, on the plate with the pie. The cherries showed through the crust in dark spots, like constellations in a dawn sky. I cut myself a slice, poured some tea, and sat by the window. A piece of pie, a cup of tea. Silence. My kitchen, my apartment, my business, my life, all mine. Earned, fought for, reclaimed. I bit into the pie. The cherries were tart, the crust was sweet, and that combination was so right, so much like Mom, that my nose started to sting. My mother-in-law called 2 more times, in July and September. Both times I declined. In October, she stopped. Vitali sent a message on New Year's Eve. "Happy New Year. Forgive me if you can." I read it, deleted it, put the phone on the charger and headed to Dad's in Tula to ring in the new year. We sat at that same wooden table, eating Olivier salad that I'd made with Mom's recipe, with homemade mayonnaise and dill pickles, not the sweet kind. And Dad told me how he'd been fixing the Moskvich in the garage and found Mom's earring in the glove compartment lost 15 years ago. I laughed, easily, for real.